Great to be here in Bendigo in person to talk to you about permaculture. And I suppose its relevance in really pandemic times that we sort of seem to be, to some extent, settling into. So my partner Sue and I have travelled from Meliadora, our home of the last 35 years on the edge of Hepburn. And of course that journey has been all through Dja Dja Wurrung country that, like the rest of Australia, was never ceded by the Indigenous people, despite being displaced and dispersed in the 1840s by the squatters, and from the 1850s by a surging population exploiting what people in this town would probably know as the richest gold region in the world. And that wool and gold contributed to Australia becoming, by 1900, the richest country in the world per capita. So we acknowledge that complex legacy in all that we do, and further afield, including this and other presentations around the world, always by saying where we are from. So doing so online has been not such a big thing for me, because I decided not to fly back in 2007. So when the COVID came, yeah, it was a little bit of a change, but not so much. I've been batting away invitations to go to conferences on the other side of the world, actually dating back to the late 80s, because I couldn't necessarily justify going to the other side of the world just for when it went thin. And I suppose it's a bit like we used to say, collapse now and avoid the rush. So change your behaviour ahead of the world needing to change, and then it doesn't sort of seem so bad when it happens. And the way things are going, future invitations to come as far as Bendigo might depend on a wood gasifier powered vehicle if we want to avoid the global corporate transport solutions. And rather than being abundant and freeing, are likely to be one way or another more of a straitjacket. So we'll come to that, I suppose, that living with uncertainty is all part of the global shared experience in which we apply permaculture ethics and design principles to both broadacre land use and how people can be more gainfully resettled in our rural hinterlands. But my strategic focus over the last 2 decades has mostly been on the low density residential areas around our capital cities, regional towns, and even small towns like where we live in Hepburn. And in this presenting our Retrosuburbia strategy, I trust that you'll find something useful whether you live in an apartment, on a farm, or even in a vehicle. So I like to explain permaculture as a design system for resilient living and land use, rather than just a cool form of organic gardening. And while the strategies and techniques vary with place and context, the foundational ethics and design principles govern, guide, and inform those strategies and techniques. Permaculture design can be applied to most areas of life and work. And the permaculture flower organises the scope of permaculture action into 7 domains. The domain of land and nature stewardship, including gardening, animal husbandry, forestry, all of those sorts of activities, is the primary domain from where we learn the design principles in a working relationship with nature, which we then apply to the other domains that are simultaneously needed to redesign for a regenerative and equitable society. But at the household level, we simplify that to 3 fields of action: the built, the biological, and the behavioural. So Retrosuburbia is a pattern language for retrofitting the built, biological and behavioural fields of suburban households, governed and empowered by permaculture ethics and design principles. I think COVID has highlighted the importance of the household non-monetary economy as a strong base to support us when the monetary economy fails for whatever reason. And I think it's shown us that actually a fair proportion of the monetary economy is actually unnecessary and inefficient in providing for needs that can actually be done at home. Yes, the subscription to the gym or going to the cafe or the dog shampoo service that we avail ourselves of, you know, they might all be added to affluent society, but I think a lot of us could see actually they're not really necessary. The tragedy is that actually a lot of the really necessary stuff is totally controlled by globally interconnected corporations. And what COVID has also shown is that a lot of the discretionary economy is still managed by humans, small business people. And so there's been this double-edged sword that COVID has allowed people to realise, hey, we can do a whole lot of things for ourselves at home that we don't actually need to do in the monetary economy. And that commuting each day to work, school and entertainment has been shown to be unnecessary for many. But I think the more subtle learnings are that multi-generational households and larger households are the ways that most people survive and thrive challenging times through history. And even before COVID, in the years after the GFC, which hit the United States very, very hard, average household size was going back up. I'm not talking about house size, I'm talking about how many people live together in a functional household. Now, of course, people coming together in that way is not necessarily out of choice, but more out of necessity. But I think COVID has shown that single person households are incredibly inefficient and often lonely places without the support of the commute and consume economy. Because all of our social needs are also met in that way. Because if there's just one of us, often, you know, there's not much at home, and maybe us and the cat. So I want to talk briefly about the lineage of this retro-suburbia focus on the household level. So permaculture was conceived in the mid-70s, a decade before the sustainability concept was popularised. And in the early years, permaculture was really mostly applied by individualistic pioneers, commonly focused on self-reliance in rural environments. And in Australia and many other countries, those projects included horticultural and architectural innovations in both household scale and intentional design community contexts on what planners call and architects call greenfield site, starting from scratch on a paddock, you know, where we're going to put the house, put the road and the orchard and whatever. So since those years, permaculture has grown and evolved into a worldwide movement across more than 100 countries with many different expressions and evolutions. And some have suggested that permaculture may be Australia's greatest intellectual export. So one of those evolutions was the transition towns movement. In 2005, Rob Hopkins, who was the founder of the transition towns movement, was a permaculture teacher and activist living the back to the land life in the Hollies community in rural Ireland, when he invited me and Richard Heinberg and a whole lot of other people to a conference there called Fueling the Future, which was part of a 6-month teaching and study tour that we did in Europe, organised around that Europe and North America. So transition took off with Rob's move to the small town of Totnes in southern England. And transition in Britain, Australia and other countries around the world has been about community